So we're back once again, and this time what we're going to do is we are going to talk about MIDI controllers and MIDI mapping. So we'll get straight to the point like I usually do, and here we go in front of Live. We've got a set already open. I've got multiple tracks in it, and what we're going to do is we're just going to talk through the MIDI controllers that I have installed already in my preferences pane here. So we click on the MIDI tab, which is already open, and what we can see is MIDI ports, and we can see our inputs and we can see our outputs. Okay, so as inputs, what I've got is I've got my Brain 2 controls, which is the MIDI controller that I've built myself. We've got the Traktor Control S8, and we've got the MPD 232, which has multiple inputs coming from it. Last but by no means least, a very important input, we've got the IAC driver, which we've already been through, and we all know how crucial this is in terms of communication and keeping everything in sync across multiple hosts and even between apps on the same host. What we'll see is we've also got outputs for each one of these as well, and what you will notice is that for all these inputs, apart from the IAC driver, they're turned on. I've got them all coming in so that Ableton is receiving MIDI in from all of these devices, the Traktor Control S8, the MPD 232, and my MIDI controller. However, what you will see is that there is no output to any of these, okay? And you'll also notice that the IAC driver is turned off for input as well. The reason for this is usually when I'm using Ableton Live, what I'm doing is I am sending MIDI data out from Ableton Live in terms of communication, okay? So I use the IAC driver for that. So if I am sending MIDI data to anything else, I will use the IAC driver, or indeed I might use a network session, which we've talked about in Bonjour. We'll get to that as well later on when we're doing the build. So essentially what I'm doing here is you need to set these up correctly to make sure that you're not generating MIDI loops for yourself. So if I am sending stuff out the IAC driver, and you can see at the moment on the bottom of the screen, we've got the output is turned on for the IAC driver as well. Whatever we send out, it's going to come back in, and that immediately creates us a MIDI loop, which is exactly what we don't want. It'll completely screw everything up. We don't want to see that. We don't want to know about it. We don't want to let that happen, okay? This is the exact same reason why I've got all of these coming in as inputs, so that I can control Ableton Live with my controller, turn up and down faders, and we'll go through the MIDI mapping in just a moment. But I only send data out on the IAC driver, so some of the other applications won't be receiving data from the controllers, but only receiving data from the IAC driver or from the network session. And again, this is to prevent MIDI loops actually happening. So if I close down this pane, what I'm going to do is I'm going to push up and down a fader on my MPD, and what we can see over here in the top right where there's the MIDI section, we can see it's flashing, which means that it's receiving MIDI in, which means my controller is set up properly. As I said, beside that, we're going to do some MIDI mapping. So what we've got here, we've got the MIDI button. I'm just going to flip over to the other view. I'm going to hit MIDI, and we see everything turns blue. So what I can do is I can come down here and we see this fader here for the first track. I'm going to click on this. We see 1, 2, 3, 4 little corners appear around it. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to move the first fader. And if I open this out, what we can see is we've got our control messages here of what's been mapped to what. So if I go along and select the next one, and I use fader number 2, we can see that control message popping in there, which tells me this fader is now controlling the track volume. We can continue on. That's the next one mapped. That's the next one mapped. And so on and so forth. I'm not going to make you sit here and watch me do all of this. We turn off the MIDI mapping, and if I come back to my controller now, we can see that as I move the fader up and down, the fader is also moving up and down in Ableton Live. This also works for the controls. I've already mapped the play button. So on and so forth. Simple, as you can see, and as I said to you, once you're actually running this and once you actually have it up and running properly, MIDI mapping is simple. You can MIDI map one, you can MIDI map everything else. Any control that's MIDI mappable, you can program it, get onto it. It's your controller. You can set up your own controllers. You can do this with TouchOSC as well. So simple. It's very easy to use. It gives you complete control over all the parameters you want to have, so that you're not messing around with a mouse. You're not sitting at the laptop trying to squidge around things. You have it all in front of you, all of it for the play, all of it to your touch, all of it for great fun. Get into it.